He was the highest paid actor on the planet for nearly a decade straight. He made over $3 billion for one studio alone. And then he lost almost everything, not slowly and quietly the way most people lose things, but publicly, violently, and in front of the entire world. How did Johnny Depp go from being the most beloved movie star on Earth to being dropped by every major studio in Hollywood inside of 18 months? What is the real story behind the fortune he burned through so completely that his own business managers called it the most reckless spending they had ever witnessed in the entertainment industry? And why, after everything, are the biggest directors in the world quietly lining up to work with him again? Welcome to the Biographer channel. Today we are going deep into one of the most extraordinary, most turbulent, and most genuinely complicated careers in the history of American cinema. We are talking about Johnny Depp. Before we get into it, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications. You do not want to miss what comes next on this channel. Subscribe button red, bell on, and we are starting. Childhood. John Christopher Depp II was born on June 9, 1963 in Owensboro, Kentucky. He was the youngest of 4 children born to John Christopher Depp I, a civil engineer, and Betty Sue Palmer, a waitress. The family moved constantly throughout his childhood, relocating over 30 times before Johnny was a teenager. By his own account, he attended so many different schools in so many different towns that he never developed a stable sense of belonging anywhere. He was always the new kid, always starting over, always reading a room full of strangers and figuring out how to navigate it. That skill, the ability to walk into an unfamiliar environment and almost instantly understand its dynamics and the people inside it, would become the foundation of everything he later built professionally. But as a child, it mostly just made him feel like an outsider wherever he went. His father was a quiet, reserved man who worked hard and provided for the family without a great deal of warmth or emotional expressiveness. His mother, Betty Sue, was a different story entirely. She was vivid, complicated, unpredictable, and she struggled with profound emotional instability throughout Johnny's childhood. There were periods of warmth and intimacy, and then sudden withdrawals that left the children scrambling to understand what had shifted. Johnny has spoken about his mother in interviews with a complexity that makes clear she was both a wound and a gift. She gave him his sensitivity and his capacity for empathy. She also gave him his lifelong struggle with the feeling that the ground beneath him could disappear without warning. When Johnny was 7 years old, his mother gave him a guitar. He has described that moment as the one that saved him, not metaphorically, literally. He was a child with no stable home, no stable school, no stable social world, and suddenly he had something that was entirely his own, something that responded to him, something he could control and shape and communicate through when every other avenue of communication felt impossible. He taught himself to play obsessively. By his early teens, he was performing in local bands around the various Florida towns the family had settled near, playing the kind of small bars and venues that do not technically allow teenagers but make exceptions for kids who can actually play. He was 15 years old when his parents divorced. The family had been living in Miramar, Florida at the time, and the divorce hit Johnny with a force that he has described as destabilizing in a way that nothing before it had been. He dropped out of Miramar High School at 16 to pursue music full-time. His mother actually supported the decision. She drove him to the school herself and helped him withdraw. He spent the next few years grinding through the Florida music circuit as a guitarist, cycling through bands with names that captured the optimism and the desperation of young musicians who genuinely believe they are about to be discovered. One of those bands, a group called The Kids, was good enough to relocate to Los Angeles in search of a real break. They were not discovered. They were ignored. They slept on floors. They played shows for nobody. They drove a van that broke down with a reliability that started to feel personal. And then, in 1983, Johnny Depp met Nicolas Cage at a party. Cage took one look at the 20-year-old guitarist with the jawline and the cheekbones and told him directly that he should be acting. He connected Depp with his own agent. Within a year, Johnny Depp had his first professional acting role. He has said in interviews that he did not choose acting. Acting chose him through a chain of coincidences that he had absolutely nothing to do with engineering.
He simply said yes when the door opened, the way he had always said yes to whatever came next, because being adaptable was the only survival skill he had ever really developed. Early career. His first screen appearance was in Wes Craven's original Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984. He played Glenn Lance, the boyfriend of the film's lead character Nancy, and his death scene, in which he is swallowed by his own bed and then erupted from it in a geyser of blood, became one of the most visually memorable moments of the entire franchise. He was 20 years old, completely inexperienced as an actor, and he was sharing a set with a director who knew exactly how to use a camera and a young face. Craven later said that Depp had a quality that was almost impossible to define but immediately visible on film. A kind of internal life that the camera was drawn to even when he was doing nothing, not performing, not indicating emotion, just existing in a scene. That quality would become the central element of everything he later built professionally. But as a child, it mostly just made him feel like an outsider wherever he went.
But the path was not immediate. After A Nightmare on Elm Street, the roles did not rush in the way he might have hoped. He appeared in a handful of forgettable projects and spent time genuinely uncertain whether acting was a real career or just a lucky accident that was not going to repeat itself. Then, in 1987, he was cast in the television series 21 Jump Street as Officer Tom Hansen, a young police officer who goes undercover in high school because he looks young enough to pass as a student. The show became a genuine cultural phenomenon almost immediately. Teenager magazines put him on their covers. Fan mail arrived by the truckload. He became the kind of television star who generates screaming crowds at public appearances. He hated it. Not the work, exactly, but the packaging around it. The way the show was using his face as a commodity, the way the scripts reduced his character to a series of attractive poses in service of simple plots. He fought constantly with producers over the direction of the character. He deliberately sabotaged scenes he found artistically worthless. He showed up with bizarre haircuts and unusual clothes, anything to introduce friction into a machine that wanted him smooth and marketable and quiet. When John Waters cast him in the 1990 comedy Cry Baby, a film deliberately designed to mock the very teen idol image that 21 Jump Street had built around him, Depp accepted immediately and used it as a very public declaration of what kind of actor he intended to be. He was not interested in being a product, he was interested in being an artist. And if those two things were incompatible, he was going to choose art every single time, regardless of the financial consequences. That decision shaped everything that came next, the glory and the disaster, both. New direction. In 1990, Tim Burton cast him as Edward Scissorhands, a gentle, artificial man with blades where his hands should be, who cannot touch the world he loves without cutting it. The film required almost no dialogue. It required physical presence, pantomime, the ability to communicate an inner life through eyes and posture and movement alone while wearing a costume that made normal human expression nearly impossible. Depp was extraordinary in it. The film was not the obvious commercial choice. Burton was not yet the guaranteed box office name he would become. The story was strange and melancholy, and did not follow any of the rules that studios used to predict audience appetite. But it connected with audiences in a way that rational calculation could never have predicted, because it was made by people who genuinely felt it. And Johnny Depp, playing a character who could not hold anything without destroying it, found something in that story that was deeply and personally true. The two became one of the great actor-director partnerships in the history of American cinema. Over the following 3 decades, they would make 8 films together, each one stranger than the last, each one completely uninterested in giving the audience what they expected. What is less known is how physically demanding the preparation for Edward Scissorhands actually was. Depp worked for weeks with the costume department to find exactly the right weight and angle for the scissor blades, so that every movement read as both dangerous and tender simultaneously. He studied mime.
He studied silent film actors from the era before sound, Buster Keaton specifically, to understand how to make a body speak without words. He arrived on set having done more preparation for a role with almost no dialogue than most actors do for lead parts with pages of monologue. Tim Burton has said publicly that directing Johnny Depp requires a specific kind of trust, because Depp will always arrive with choices that were not in the script and not in any conversation during pre-production. They will simply appear on the day, fully formed, completely committed, and often exactly right. The director's job is to be prepared for that and to recognize when the unexpected thing is better than what was planned. Rise to A-list. Through the early and mid-90s, Depp built one of the most deliberately unconventional filmographies of any actor working at his commercial level. He starred in John Waters. He starred in Emir Kusturica. He starred in Jim Jarmusch. He turned down roles that would have made him considerably wealthier and more conventionally famous in favor of projects he interested him, regardless of their market potential. In 1993, he starred in Benny and June, a romantic comedy about a man whose eccentricity and sweetness helps a mentally ill young woman find connection with the world. His physical performance in the film, drawing heavily on the silent comedy tradition he had studied for Edward Scissorhands, received some of the best reviews of his career to that point and earned him a Golden Globe nomination. That same year, he starred in What's Eating Gilbert Grape alongside a 20-year-old Leonardo DiCaprio. Depp played the anchor of the film, the still center around which DiCaprio's extraordinary and chaotic performance could orbit. It is a kind of acting that gets less attention than the showier work, but requires tremendous skill. To be completely present and completely grounded when a performance of that intensity is happening next to you is not passive. It is its own very demanding form of craft. In 1990 came Ed Wood, the Tim Burton film that many serious critics still consider the best work either of them has ever done. Depp played the notoriously terrible filmmaker Edward D. Wood Jr. with a complete and utterly genuine love for the character. There is no condescension in the performance, no winking at the audience, no distance between Depp and Wood. He simply inhabits a man who believes completely in work that the rest of the world finds laughable, and the film becomes, unexpectedly, one of the most moving meditations on artistic faith ever committed to celluloid. For the role, Depp spent months studying Wood's actual films, his interviews, the accounts of people who had known him. He developed specific physical habits, a particular walk, a way of holding the hands, a quality of enthusiasm in the eyes that never quite matches the surrounding reality. He wore Angora sweaters throughout the shoot because Wood was known to wear them, and Depp believed that the physical sensation of the wool against his skin kept him connected to the character's interiority in ways that nothing else could. He was paid very little for that film. He did not care. The heyday of a career. The transformation into the most commercially dominant actor on the planet happened with a single phone call from Gore Verbinski in 2002. Disney was making Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl, and they needed someone to play Captain Jack Sparrow, a pirate who serves as the film's secondary lead and comic relief. The role was written as a fairly conventional swashbuckling rogue. What Depp did with it was so far from what anyone anticipated that Disney executives called the studio's production chief during the early dailies to report that something had gone seriously wrong. Depp had based Jack Sparrow on Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones and on
Pepe Le Pew, the cartoon skunk. He had decided that a man who spends his life on a ship in the sun and wind and salt air, drinking constantly and sleeping whenever he lands, would move through the world with a specific quality of fluid, swaying unpredictability. Every scene with Jack Sparrow is a negotiation between a man who wants something very specific and a body that is not entirely cooperating with the plan. The executives watching the early footage were certain it was a disaster. They called the director. They called the producers. They discussed whether Depp needed to be replaced. Verbinski told them to trust him and keep shooting. Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl made $654 million worldwide. It was the third highest grossing film of 2003. Johnny Depp was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actor. He was the first performance in a Disney film to receive that nomination in decades. Over the following decade, the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise alone generated approximately $4 billion worldwide. Johnny Depp's fee for the films escalated with each installment until he was earning between $50 and $90 million per film, depending on back-end participation. Combined with his other work during this period, the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory remake with Burton, Sweeney Todd, which earned him a Golden Globe and another Academy Award nomination, the animated film Rango, for which he won the Saturn Award, Public Enemies with Michael Mann, he became the highest-paid actor in the world. For 3 consecutive years, his films earned more than any other actor's films on the planet. He was spending money at a pace that alarmed everyone around him. When the money disappeared. The numbers that emerged during later legal proceedings are worth sitting with for a moment because they are genuinely extraordinary. At the peak of his earning, Johnny Depp was spending approximately $2 million per month, not per year, per month. He owned 14 homes simultaneously across multiple countries, including a chain of private islands in the Bahamas that he purchased specifically to give himself and his friends a place to decompress between productions. He owned a 150-foot yacht. He owned a private jet that he used so frequently that the annual cost exceeded $30 million. He had a staff of 40 full-time employees at various properties who continued to be paid regardless of whether he was in residence. He purchased a village in the south of France and spent millions restoring it to his personal aesthetic vision. He maintained a private museum-quality collection of artwork, memorabilia, and cultural artifacts that required its own dedicated staff to manage and insure. He spent $3 million on rockets to blast the ashes of his friend Hunter S. Thompson from a cannon, a tribute Thompson had requested and Depp honored without hesitation, regardless of the price. He spent heavily and consistently on friends, family, and people he liked. He paid salaries for musicians he believed in. He covered medical expenses for people in his life who needed help. He was, by every account of people who worked with him, one of the most genuinely generous people in the industry. He also trusted almost everyone around him entirely. His business managers would later claim they had warned him repeatedly about the spending trajectory. He would later claim they had hidden the true state of his finances from him and mismanaged enormous sums. The legal proceedings between Depp and his former management company produced numbers suggesting that somewhere in the region of $30 to $40 million had been mishandled or improperly allocated. The full picture remains genuinely contested. What is not contested is the outcome. By the mid-2010s, Johnny Depp was in serious financial trouble, despite having earned in excess of $650 million across his career. He had to sell the French Village. He had to sell properties. He had to restructure his entire financial life from a position of acute vulnerability. And then the personal situation became public. Beginning of the end. In 2016, his marriage to actress Amber Heard, which had lasted 15 months, ended in a public filing that included allegations that defined the next 6 years of his life and career. The details of what followed are now extraordinarily well documented due to the 2022 defamation trial that was broadcast live and watched by tens of millions of people around the world. In 2018, an op-ed appeared in the Washington Post, written by Heard describing herself as a public figure representing domestic abuse. Depp was not named in the piece, but was universally understood to be the subject. The response from Hollywood was immediate. Disney quietly removed him from future Pirates of the Caribbean films. Warner Brothers removed him from the Fantastic Beasts franchise after requesting he resign. Projects in development were paused. The phone stopped ringing. He had gone from the highest-paid actor on Earth to effectively unemployable inside of 2 years. What followed was a period that Depp has described in various interviews with a controlled candor that becomes more striking the more you understand what was actually happening privately. He retreated. He played guitar with friends in rented houses. He painted. He gave interviews that were sometimes unguarded in ways that concerned people close to him. He looked like a man who was deciding at a very fundamental level what he was actually made of. He sued the British tabloid The Sun for calling him a wife-beater. He lost that case in the British courts in 2020.
It looked like the end. And then the 2022 trial happened. The decision to sue Amber Heard directly in the United States for defamation was a choice that many of his advisors apparently counseled against. The trial would be public. Every private detail of his life, his finances, his struggles with addiction, his text messages, his recorded phone calls, everything would be exposed to a global audience with no filter. He did it anyway. The trial ran for 6 weeks. The evidence presented included audio recordings, text messages, testimony from witnesses on both sides, and detailed accounts of incidents that both parties described in completely contradictory terms. The public watched it in real time. Hundreds of millions of people formed opinions, changed opinions, and formed them again as new information emerged daily. The jury ruled in Depp's favor. He was awarded $15 million in damages, later adjusted to $10 million by Virginia's damages cap. Heard was awarded $2 million on her countersuit. The verdict did not simply exonerate him legally. It shifted something in the public understanding of what had happened to him. An actor who had been treated as guilty without trial by an industry that valued its own image over any individual's right to a fair process was now standing on the other side of a verdict and looking at an industry that suddenly had some accounting to do. Comeback and return.
Condition rather than a response to joy. He laughs when he is in pain. He laughs when he is frightened. The laugh is both armor and prison. Joaquin Phoenix spent months developing the specific laugh used in the film. Not one laugh, but the specific mechanics of how this particular man, in this particular body, with this particular history, laughs in this particular moment. He has described it as one of the most psychologically challenging elements of the entire preparation, finding something that was not performed, something that actually came from the character rather than from Joaquin Phoenix doing an impression of how the character might laugh. The film opened to extraordinary polarization. Some critics loved it, some critics were deeply troubled by it and argued that it was irresponsible. Some audience members walked out. Some audience members watched it multiple times. It made $1 billion worldwide. It is the highest-grossing R-rated film in the history of cinema. And Joaquin Phoenix won the Academy Award for Best Actor. He was 44 years old. It was his 4th nomination and his first win. In his acceptance speech, he talked about second chances and about the way he had been given opportunities that others had not been given, and about the responsibility that came with that. He talked about his brother. He said he felt his brother's spirit and knew that he was holding the Oscar not just for himself. He walked off stage and has given very few extended interviews since. He continues to work entirely on his own terms. He chooses projects that interest him without apparent regard for their commercial potential. He prepares with an intensity that is now the stuff of industry legend. He does not do franchise films. He does not do press tours he finds meaningless. He does not perform celebrity in any of the ways that the industry expects. He is considered by many serious working actors and directors to be the most purely gifted screen actor alive. He has earned that assessment by consistently refusing every easier version of the career he could have had. He has turned down roles that would have made him significantly wealthier and significantly more famous in the conventional sense. He has chosen again and again the harder thing, the more uncertain thing, the project that required more from him than he was sure he could give. The Academy finally gave him the statue. The industry finally gave him the credit. The audience finally caught up to what people who had been watching carefully since To Die For and Gladiator and Walk the Line and The Master had understood for 20 years. Joaquin Phoenix is not trying to be a movie star. He is trying to do something else, something harder to define and harder to replicate. He is trying to find in every character he plays some truth about what it means to be a human being, in a body, in a life, in a world that rarely makes sense. He started as a child, performing on a street corner with his siblings because his family needed money. He lost his brother in the most brutal and public way imaginable. He disappeared from the industry on purpose to make a point that most people missed entirely.
He walked away from dozens of roles that would have made him the most commercially successful actor of his generation. He put himself through physical and psychological transformation after transformation in service of characters that challenged and disturbed and occasionally frightened the people watching them. And he won anyway, on his own terms, at his own pace, by his own definition of what winning means. That is not a Hollywood story. That is something rarer and stranger and considerably more worth your time. We have only covered the first half of Joaquin Phoenix's story today. The second part goes even deeper, into the relationships he has protected ferociously from public attention, into the projects he turned down that became some of the biggest films of the last 20 years, and into what the people who have worked with him most closely say about what it is actually like to share a set with him. The moment this video reaches 10,000 likes, we release part 2 immediately. That is the deal. You know what to do. While you are waiting, we have 2 more deep dives on screen right now that are absolutely worth your time. Click on either one and find out things about these people that most of the internet still has completely wrong. That is all for today. This has been the Biographer Channel. Leave us a like. We will see you very soon.
Before Beck's death in January of 2023. The album received genuinely strong reviews from music critics who had no reason to be generous about a movie star's side project. It was simply good. He continued painting, and exhibitions of his visual artwork, detailed expressionistic portraits of figures who had meant something to him, David Bowie, Hunter Thompson, Bob Dylan, were received with more critical seriousness than the art world typically extends to celebrity hobbyists. Because it was not a hobby, it was the same impulse that had driven everything else he had ever done, the need to find a form and inhabit it completely. He has spoken in recent interviews about the experience of the last several years with a clarity that is different from what came before. There is less performance in it, less of the elaborate persona construction that he had used for decades to manage public appearances. He seems like a man who went through something genuinely extreme and came out of it having decided that the careful management of his own image was simply not worth the energy anymore. What he has said about his work in this period is interesting. He has talked about returning to the thing that mattered before the franchise money and the global fame changed the scale of everything. The pleasure of inhabiting a character, the specific concentration required to be fully present in a scene, the way that acting, done seriously, requires you to abandon every protective layer and be genuinely available to whatever the moment demands. He has said that losing the career he had, at least temporarily, clarified something he had known since he was a 20-year-old guitarist sleeping on floors in Los Angeles. The work is the thing, not the recognition, not the money, not the cultural position. The work itself, the specific, irreplaceable experience of being inside a performance that is actually working, that is the only thing that ever really satisfied him, and the only thing he is genuinely unwilling to give up. At 60 years old, Johnny Depp is one of the most interesting actors working today precisely because of everything he has survived. The range of experience he carries into a role now, the understanding of loss and of resilience, and of what actually holds when everything else falls away, that is not something that can be manufactured or faked or learned in any acting class. He started as a guitarist who fell into acting by accident because a friend pointed him in the right direction. He built one of the most genuinely idiosyncratic major careers in the history of American film by saying no to the easy version of everything and yes to whatever actually interested him. He made more money than almost any actor in history and spent it with a completeness that was almost artistic in its thoroughness. He survived a public destruction that would have permanently ended most people. He stood in front of a jury and asked for a fair hearing and got one. And he is back on screen, doing the thing that saved him when he was a lost teenager in Florida who had never quite belonged anywhere. The same thing it always was. Just him and a character, and the specific private transaction between an actor and the truth that happens when everything else goes quiet. We have only covered the first half of the full Johnny Depp story today,
The second part goes even deeper into the films that almost happened and the roles he walked away from that became some of the biggest of the last 30 years, into the friendships and collaborations that defined his creative life, and into what the people who have worked most closely with him say about what is actually happening inside a Johnny Depp performance from the perspective of someone standing next to it. The moment this video reaches 10,000 likes, we put out part 2 immediately. You know what to do. While you are waiting, there are 2 more videos on your screen right now that are absolutely worth your time. Click on either one and find out things about these people that most of the world still has completely wrong. That is everything for today. This has been the Biographer Channel. Leave us a like. We will see you very soon.